We turn now to the tributes pouring in for Grammy-winning R&B singer D'Angelo, dying at just 51 years old after a battle with pancreatic cancer.
Music fans around the world are heartbroken as shocking new details emerge about the final days of legendary singer D'Angelo. Once hailed as one of the most soulful voices of his generation, his sudden downfall and mysterious death have left fans searching for answers. Behind the fame, awards, and smooth melodies lay a life filled with pain, pressure, and secrets long kept hidden. But what truly happened in those haunting last days of his life? Stay tuned. The truth will leave you breathless. D'Angelo's final curtain call. The world woke up to a silence it wasn't ready for. On October 14, 2025, that silence carried weight, the kind that sinks deep into the soul. D'Angelo, the mysterious magnetic force who had once redefined the sound of modern R&B, was gone. But his passing wasn't a headline. It was a heartbreak.
His family says he died after a battle with cancer, calling him a shining star of their family, whose light will deeply be missed.
His death, confirmed by his family, wasn't sudden, but it still felt like the earth had shifted. For months, D'Angelo had been quietly fighting a battle only those closest to him truly understood. A grueling and private war against pancreatic cancer. He never announced it publicly. That was D'Angelo's way. The same man who could bear his soul in every song somehow kept his pain tucked away behind that quiet, guarded smile. While the world speculated about his absence from the stage and his growing reclusiveness, the truth was unfolding far from cameras and microphones. In hospital rooms and quiet, dimly lit spaces where only loved ones were allowed. Family and close friends described those final months as both painful and profound. Despite the physical decline, D'Angelo's spirit never lost its rhythm. He still asked about music, still wanted to hear the chords of something unfinished. Visitors said he'd hum melodies under his breath, fragments that carried the same warmth and melancholy that defined Voodoo and Black Messiah. It wasn't performance, it was instinct, muscle memory, the sound of a man who had lived his entire life through song. By early autumn, when the fight became harder, he was transferred to hospice care. There, surrounded by family and a handful of the people who had shaped his career, D'Angelo found peace. They say he spent those final days in quiet reflection, at times listening to gospel, the music of his childhood, as if closing the circle of his life. A pastor who visited him during those last weeks described the atmosphere as holy ground, saying, "He wasn't afraid, he just wanted to be calm." When the news finally broke, tributes poured in like waves. Questlove called him the heartbeat of neo-soul. Erykah Badu wrote simply, "Fly free, brother," and fans across the world lit candles, playing Untitled, How Does It Feel, on repeat. Not as a sensual anthem anymore, but as a hymn. D'Angelo didn't go out with noise or spectacle. He left as he had lived, quietly, soulfully, and completely on his own terms. And though his body gave in, his music, that raw, timeless pulse, didn't die with him. It lingers like smoke after fire, reminding us that some voices never truly fade. But what did those final hushed moments reveal about the man behind the music? Keep watching to uncover the intimate truth. The quiet storm before goodbye. The days leading up to D'Angelo's passing weren't marked by chaos or tabloid frenzy. They unfolded like a slow, soulful ballad, one last composition that only those closest to him could hear. For years, he had lived out of the public eye, surfacing only when the music demanded it. But in those final months, even the sound of his own voice became rare. Friends say the silence around him grew thicker, more sacred. Not the silence of defeat, but of a man preparing to let go. The illness had been creeping in quietly. By the time fans began wondering about his long absence from live shows and social media, D'Angelo was already in the middle of treatment. Cancer doesn't respect genius. It doesn't care about Grammys, legacy, or the way your voice can make the world pause for 3.5 minutes. But if the disease was relentless, so was he. Even as the treatments drained his energy, he refused to stop writing. A small notebook sat by his bed, filled with short phrases and half-written lyrics. Some were just single words: grace, still, light, words that carried the weight of reflection, as though he were trying to compose his own farewell. In the final weeks, he retreated completely from the public, moving into a private hospice surrounded by family, a few lifelong friends, and trusted collaborators. The man who once electrified arenas was now back to something simpler, the kind of intimacy that defined his earliest church days. His sister reportedly brought a keyboard to his room, and there were moments when he'd still press a few notes, lost in thought, as if reaching for one last melody. There was no bitterness in those last days, only exhaustion and grace. One visitor recalled that he still had that gentle smirk, the same one from his brown sugar days, and that he'd tell small jokes to ease the tension. He asked about his son often, about his family's well-being, and about the state of music. "Are they still singing about something real?" he once asked, smiling faintly, as if he already knew the answer. When the end came, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was morning, the light barely filtering through the blinds, and his favorite gospel playlist was softly humming through the speakers. His family held his hands, prayed, and played the hymns that had first made him believe in music's power. In that stillness, the rhythm stopped. The news, when it broke, moved like a tremor through the industry. But the reaction wasn't chaotic. It was reverent. Questlove, his longtime friend and collaborator, wrote that D'Angelo left the world the same way he created music, quietly, deeply, and with infinite soul. Musicians around the world echoed that sentiment. Some played his records on live streams. Others held candlelight gatherings in studios, where they spoke of how Voodoo or Black Messiah had changed them. Fans posted late-night covers, poems, tears. In those first few days, it became clear that his death had pulled people together, the way his music once had. The world didn't just lose a singer. It lost a spirit that had made vulnerability sound divine. His departure reminded everyone what real artistry feels like: intimate, human, unguarded. In the days that followed, a quiet mourning swept through social media and city streets. Even in grief, there was gratitude. Gratitude that D'Angelo existed at all, that he'd given the world a catalog of emotion, and that even in his final silence, he was still teaching us something. That music, like the soul, doesn't die. It just changes form. But what shaped him into the soulful legend we know as D'Angelo? Keep watching to uncover his early journey. From Richmond's choirs to the edge of greatness. Long before the world knew his name, before Brown Sugar and the Grammys, D'Angelo was just Michael Eugene Archer, a quiet kid from Richmond, Virginia, who found salvation not in the streets, but in sound. His story doesn't begin in fame or flash, but in the echo of a church organ. His father, a strict Pentecostal minister, led the congregation, while his mother's voice carried through the choir loft. For young Michael, Sunday mornings were more than ritual. They were revelation. The church became his first stage, the pews his first audience. He learned the piano not from lessons, but from curiosity. It was said that by age 3, he could pick out hymns by ear, his small fingers dancing across keys that seemed too big for his hands. The music was a language he understood before he could even write his name, and that language would soon shape the man who'd later redefine R&B. Richmond wasn't a city that promised superstardom, but it had rhythm. The air was heavy with gospel, funk, and the gritty pulse of soul music. As a teenager, D'Angelo absorbed it all: the sermons, the street sounds, the record shop melodies that drifted out onto the sidewalks. He formed his first group, Michael Archer and Precise, and began performing anywhere that would have them. What set him apart wasn't just talent, it was intensity. He didn't play music to impress. He played because he had to. By the time he hit high school, his reputation as a musical prodigy had spread. Friends remembered how he'd skip parties to stay home writing songs or recording on a 4-track machine he bought after winning the Apollo Theater's amateur night. That victory was his first taste of destiny. The trip to Harlem, standing under those bright Apollo lights, showed him that his music could move people far beyond his hometown. Soon after, his homemade demos made their way into the hands of executives at EMI Records. He wasn't chasing fame. Fame found him. When the contract came in 1993, it wasn't just a deal, it was an opening. Behind the quiet demeanor was a man who had something to say, and now he had a microphone big enough to say it. Those early days, grounded in faith and a raw, unpolished soul, gave D'Angelo the foundation that would carry him through the chaos of stardom. Every chord he played later in life, every note of pain, desire, and redemption, could be traced back to those Richmond pews. That's where the genius was born. So how did that quiet kid from Richmond transform into the voice that redefined an entire genre? Stay tuned. The answer begins with Brown Sugar. Breakthrough and Immortal albums. When Brown Sugar dropped in 1995, it didn't just hit, it moved. It slipped into the air like incense smoke, sweet and slow, wrapping around a generation hungry for something real. The radio was flooded with glossy R&B and polished pop, but D'Angelo brought something ancient, something raw. His debut felt alive, recorded straight to tape, drenched in bass and pulsing with warmth. The title track, Brown Sugar, wasn't just a song, it was a mood. It was the sound of church soul meeting street funk. Marvin Gaye reborn through a 21-year-old from Richmond. Listeners didn't just hear the music, they felt it. There was a pulse under every lyric, a heartbeat that reminded fans what soul once meant. Critics hailed it as a return to authenticity, a rebellion against the machine-made sound of the 90s. By 1996, the record went platinum, but the numbers weren't what mattered. What mattered was that Brown Sugar lit the fuse for what the world would come to call neo-soul. Alongside Erykah Badu, Lauryn Hill, and Maxwell, D'Angelo had carved out a space where vulnerability could groove, where imperfection sounded divine. Then, just when the world thought they had him figured out, he vanished, not out of arrogance, but in search of evolution. For 5 years, D'Angelo stayed mostly silent, tucked away in studios, jamming with Questlove, Pino Palladino, and other members of the loose creative collective known as the Soulquarians. What they were cooking up wasn't just an album, it was alchemy. In early 2000, Voodoo arrived, and it wasn't a follow-up, it was a transformation. Gritty, complex, and drenched in rhythm, Voodoo sounded like a seance. The drums sat just behind the beat, the bass swayed like smoke, and D'Angelo's voice floated somewhere between prayer and confession. It was music you didn't just listen to, you entered. Then came Untitled, How Does It Feel? One song, one video, one camera, one man, one take. That slow pan, that bare vulnerability. It turned him into an icon overnight. Suddenly, everyone wanted to see the man, not just hear the message, but fame is fickle. And while the world was worshiping his image, D'Angelo was recoiling from it. The irony was cruel. The song that captured his purest artistic expression became the symbol of the pressure that nearly broke him. Voodoo earned him a Grammy for Best R&B Album and a place among legends, but it also marked the start of his retreat. The music was immortal, but the man behind it was beginning to fade away. But before the fame built walls around him, there was a love that broke them down, one that revealed the man behind the myth. Stay tuned to see how it began. Family, love, and conflict. Before the fame became a fortress, D'Angelo was a man in love, deeply, recklessly, and poetically. In the mid-1990s, at the height of his creative awakening, he met Angie Stone, the powerhouse vocalist and songwriter whose voice carried the same soul his music spoke in. Their connection was instant, not just romantic, but spiritual. It wasn't about glamour or the music industry's glitter. Theirs was the kind of bond that could only be born out of shared rhythm and shared struggle. Angie saw him not as the rising prodigy the world was beginning to worship, but as Michael, the introspective artist who'd rather write in solitude than pose for cameras. She grounded him, and in return, he inspired her. The two began to create together, writing, singing, and dreaming side by side. When Angie was working on her own material, D'Angelo's fingerprints were everywhere. Subtle harmonies, co-writing credits, and the emotional pulse of a partner who understood her artistry on a cellular level. In 1998, they welcomed their son, Michael D'Angelo Archer II. His birth softened D'Angelo's edges. For a while, he found something even the music couldn't give him: a sense of peace. Friends recall that fatherhood brought out a tenderness in him that few ever saw. He'd bring the baby into the studio, whispering lullabies instead of lyrics, sometimes falling asleep on the couch between takes with his son curled against his chest. But love, especially when tethered to fame, is rarely simple. The same creative fire that made them magnetic also made them combustible. Angie was seasoned, grounded, and focused, while D'Angelo was haunted by his own need for perfection and the growing weight of expectation. Their relationship began to crack under the pressure. Long studio hours, public scrutiny, and the chaos that fame always brings. Still, even after they parted ways, their bond never completely broke. They were bound by music, by parenthood, by the years that had shaped them both. Then came 2025, a year heavy with loss. Angie Stone's tragic car accident sent a shockwave through the soul community.
R&B singer Angie Stone has died in a car crash. We're told she had just finished a concert in Mobile, Alabama Friday, was heading to Atlanta when the van she was riding in crashed.
And for D'Angelo, it cut even deeper. Friends say her death shook something loose in him, reopened wounds he'd never truly healed. In those final months, as illness crept in, he spoke of her often, not with regret, but with gratitude, for the years, for their son, for the music they made together. Their love story was imperfect, tangled, and painfully human. But within that complexity lived some of D'Angelo's most powerful songs, proof that even broken love can create timeless art. Yet behind those songs was a pain few ever truly saw. What was the cost of turning heartache into genius? Stay tuned to find out. Addiction, legal troubles, health crises, and the car crash. For all his genius, D'Angelo carried a weight few could see. Behind the smooth harmonies and velvet tone was a man constantly at war with himself. Fame, with all its lights and noise, had been both his reward and his curse. After Voodoo transformed him into a global icon, the pressure to sustain that image became overwhelming. The world longed for the D'Angelo from the untitled "How Does It Feel" video, chiseled, sensual, untouchable. But the man behind the camera was breaking under the strain of expectations. As the spotlight grew hotter, he began to retreat into the shadows, numbing the anxiety with alcohol and substance. Friends said it started small, a drink to relax, a hit to unwind. But soon, the escape became the cage. Studio sessions that once stretched into inspired marathons now turned into hazy, unfinished nights. He would vanish for weeks, then months, leaving his label, collaborators, and fans wondering if he'd ever return. By 2002, the whispers had become headlines. D'Angelo faced multiple run-ins with the law, DUIs, possession charges, and reckless driving. The man who once channeled divine energy on stage was now battling demons that clawed at his spirit. Then, in September 2005, came the breaking point. A near-fatal car crash in Virginia that left him severely injured and hospitalized. Reports later revealed he had been ejected from the vehicle after losing control, an incident many close to him described as his wake-up call. The crash could have easily ended his story, but instead, it became the painful turning point. He entered rehab, determined to claw his way back from the edge. Yet recovery, like creativity, wasn't linear. There were relapses, missed shows, and canceled recording sessions. Friends like Questlove and Raphael Saadiq stayed close, trying to remind him of the brilliance that still flickered beneath the chaos. Between Voodoo in 2000 and Black Messiah in 2014, 14 long years passed. A chasm filled with silence, struggle, and slow healing. Those who saw him during that period said he was searching for more than sobriety. He was searching for himself. And when he finally returned, he didn't bring the D'Angelo the world had idolized. He brought a wiser, wounded, resurrected soul, one who had walked through the fire and come back singing. He had fallen, risen, and found redemption through sound. But what happens when the music finally stops? Stay tuned to find out. Final Days in Context and Enduring Legacy. D'Angelo's final days weren't simply an ending. They were the quiet resolution of a life lived in rhythm. True to his nature, he faced illness away from the spotlight, surrounded by family and faith. That silence spoke volumes because for D'Angelo, privacy was peace. He had always withdrawn from the noise of fame, only to return when the world needed his voice most. To understand his final moments, one must remember his journey. The boy from Richmond who transformed modern soul. Every stage of his life felt like a cycle of retreat and rebirth. After Voodoo, he vanished. After Struggle came Black Messiah in 2014, an album that roared with protest and redemption. It wasn't just music, it was a sermon, raw and human, echoing through a restless world. Even in his last months, friends said he still thought about music. He'd hum new melodies, scribble lyrics in notebooks, and talk about one final album, something intimate and spiritual. Whether those songs ever surfaced doesn't matter. What matters is that he was still creating until the end. D'Angelo's influence runs deep. You can hear him in artists like Anderson, Pac, H.E.R., Daniel Caesar, and Frank Ocean, musicians who value truth over perfection. For Lauryn Hill, Erykah Badu, Questlove, and Raphael Saadiq, he was a reminder that authenticity is both a gift and a burden. When he passed, the silence he left behind didn't feel empty. It felt alive. His music continues to breathe, to question, to comfort. D'Angelo didn't just make songs, he made confessions that transcended time. His voice lingers, a soft but eternal echo, reminding us that the true soul never dies. It just finds new ways to be heard. So, what do you think? Did D'Angelo truly find peace in silence? Or does his soul still sing through every note he left behind? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.